The
I mean,
moment
look
my
at her.
daughter stood in
She
front
still
of
thinks
50
it's
guests and
1970.
announced that I
Bless
was
her
broke,
heart, she tried.
I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Let's be honest, Vanessa laughed, raising her wine glass. My mom hasn't had money in years. If it weren't for me, she'd probably be living in a tiny apartment somewhere. A few
Mother,
people
please
chuckled.
don't.
Others looked at me with pity. I sat there in silence, holding back tears. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and froze. The caller wasn't family. It wasn't a friend. It was someone whose call could change everything. Before I could answer, a second call came in immediately. And when Vanessa saw the name on the screen, the smile slowly disappeared from her face. If you've ever been judged by the people you sacrificed everything for, I'd love to hear your story. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching, from what time is it there right now, and what would you have done if you were sitting in my seat that night? I wish I could tell you that my daughter's words shocked me that night. The truth is, they didn't. What shocked me was how many people believed her. The party was being held at Vanessa and Richard's mansion in a wealthy suburb outside Atlanta. The house sat on nearly 2 acres of land with perfectly trimmed hedges, a circular driveway, and more outdoor lighting than my entire neighborhood combined. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Valet attendants stood near the entrance. A live jazz band played softly near the pool. Everything about the evening was designed to impress. And it did. I arrived 20 minutes early in my 12-year-old Toyota Camry. The paint was fading in places and the air conditioner only worked when it felt like cooperating. But I loved that car. It was paid for. Unlike many things in that driveway. I remember sitting behind the steering wheel for a moment before getting out. I looked at the mansion and smiled. Years ago, seeing my daughter live in a place like that would have filled me with pride. Now it mostly filled me with questions. The front door opened before I reached it. Vanessa stepped outside wearing an expensive white dress and diamond earrings that sparkled beneath the porch lights. She hugged me quickly. Not warmly, just quickly. The kind of hug someone gives because people are watching. "Mom, you made it," she said. "I wouldn't miss it." Her eyes moved to my clothes. I was wearing a simple navy blue dress, the same dress I'd worn to church a few weeks earlier. I saw the disappointment on her face immediately. "You could have dressed up a little more," she whispered. I smiled. "This is fine." "Well," she sighed. "Just stay close to me tonight. That should have been my first warning." Inside the house was packed. Business associates, neighbors, friends, extended family, people I hadn't seen in years. As soon as Vanessa entered the room, she transformed. Her smile widened. Her voice became louder. Her laugh became more dramatic. She floated through the crowd like a politician during election season. I followed quietly behind. Several guests greeted me politely. A few remembered me from years ago. Most didn't. One woman shook my hand. "You must be Vanessa's mother." "Yes, she talks about you all the time." Something about the way she said it made me uneasy. "Does she?" I asked. The woman laughed. "Oh yes, you're famous." Before I could ask what she meant, Vanessa appeared beside us. "My mother is the strongest woman I know," she announced. The woman smiled. I almost believed Vanessa meant it. Then came the second half. She had to become strong after making every financial mistake imaginable. The woman laughed. Vanessa laughed harder. I forced a smile. The woman looked uncomfortable. "Vanessa," I said softly. "What?" She replied innocently. "I'm joking." But she wasn't. Not really. That was the pattern all evening. Every compliment came with a hidden insult. Every story came at my expense. At first, it was subtle. Then it became impossible to ignore. A man asked if I had retired from nursing. Before I could answer, Vanessa jumped in. Oh, Mom retired years ago. Yes, I said, mostly because she had to. The man looked confused. Vanessa laughed. You know how some people plan for retirement and some people don't. A few guests chuckled. I felt my stomach tighten. Vanessa, I said quietly. What? That's enough. She raised her hands dramatically. Mom, I'm kidding. But she kept going. Again, and again, and again. An hour later, I found myself sitting near the pool with a glass of iced tea. The night air felt cooler than the atmosphere inside the house. I watched guests mingle beneath strings of white lights. I listened to conversations drift through the air. And then I heard my own name. 3 women stood nearby. They didn't realize I was close enough to hear. Poor Alexis. Vanessa does so much for her. I heard she lost almost everything. Really? Oh yes, Vanessa told us. Apparently, she has no savings left. I felt the blood drain from my face. One woman shook her head sympathetically. It's nice that Vanessa takes care of her. Not many children would. I stared at my glass. Suddenly, everything made sense. These people weren't laughing because of a joke. They were laughing because they believed a story. A story Vanessa had been telling for years. A story where I was the irresponsible mother, the helpless widow, the financial burden, the woman who needed rescuing, and Vanessa. Vanessa was the successful daughter who generously carried me through life. The truth was so different that it almost made me laugh. Almost. A few minutes later, my niece approached. Aunt Alexis. I looked up. Hi, Lauren. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. She sat beside me. Why does Vanessa tell everyone you're broke? The question hit harder because it came without cruelty. Only confusion. I stared at the water. I didn't know she did. Lauren frowned. She has for years. Years. Not months. Years. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something sadder. I suddenly realized this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't stress. This was a carefully crafted image Vanessa had built. Brick by brick. Lie by lie. I looked toward the house. Vanessa stood near the center of the crowd, laughing, smiling, accepting compliments, the queen of her kingdom. And for the first time that night, I found myself wondering when exactly I had lost my daughter. Not physically, emotionally. The little girl who used to hold my hand at the grocery store. The teenager who cried when I worked double shifts. The young woman who promised she'd never forget everything I sacrificed for her. Where had she gone? My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out. A text message. The sender's name immediately caught my attention. Howard Bennett, my late husband's attorney. My heart skipped. Howard almost never contacted me directly unless something important had happened. The message was short. Alexis, please call me as soon as possible. It's urgent. I read it twice. Then 3 times. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Before I could respond, I looked up and saw Vanessa walking toward me. She was smiling. But something about that smile felt forced. Almost nervous. Almost desperate. And in her hand was a thick envelope. Mom, she said sweetly. There's something I need you to sign tonight. For the first time all evening, I felt a chill run down my spine. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure this party had ever been about celebrating Vanessa at all. And whatever was inside that envelope, I had a feeling it was connected to everything, including the urgent message from Howard Bennett. The game I didn't know I was playing had just begun. As I stared at the envelope in Vanessa's hand, a memory surfaced so suddenly that it almost stole my breath. I saw a little girl standing beside a hospital vending machine. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her backpack was nearly as big as she was. She looked tired, lonely, and she was waiting for me to finish another night shift. That little girl was Vanessa. Back then, she used to tell everyone her mother was a hero. Sometimes I wonder what happened to that child. Because the woman standing in front of me now felt like a stranger. "Mom." Vanessa waved the envelope slightly. "You okay?" I forced myself back to the present. "I'm fine." "Good," she said. "We can talk about this later." Her smile looked rehearsed, then she walked away again. I watched her disappear into the crowd. For a moment, I forgot about the envelope. I forgot about Howard's message. I forgot about the party, because my mind had traveled backward. Back to a life Vanessa seemed determined to erase. 32 years earlier, my husband Daniel died unexpectedly from a heart attack. He was only 48. One day he was helping our daughter with a science project. The next day, he was gone. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. One moment, I was a wife. The next, I was a widow. Vanessa was 13. I remember sitting beside her on the couch after the funeral. She held my hand so tightly that it hurt. "Mom," she whispered. What happens now, I didn't know. But I knew one thing. No matter how hard life became, I would make sure my daughter never felt abandoned. So I worked, and worked, and worked. I was already a nurse at the time. After Daniel died, I started taking every shift available. Weekends, holidays, night shifts, double shifts, anything. Sometimes I worked 16 hours straight. Sometimes I slept in my car between shifts because driving home felt impossible. There were nights my feet hurt so badly that I cried in the shower. But I never complained to Vanessa. She was a child. She deserved a childhood. Not the burden of her mother's worries. Money was tight. Very tight. Daniel had left us some savings, but not enough to carry us for years. I learned how to stretch every dollar. I clipped coupons. I bought secondhand furniture. I postponed vacations. I stopped buying things for myself. Every decision had the same goal. Protect Vanessa. Give Vanessa opportunities. Make sure Vanessa never felt poor. Ironically, years later, she would tell people I was the one who didn't understand money. Life has a strange sense of humor. When Vanessa graduated from high school, she was accepted into one of the best universities in Georgia. I still remember the excitement in her voice. "Mom, I got in?" I cried harder than she did. But after the celebration came reality. Tuition, housing, books, fees, numbers that looked terrifying on paper. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I ran calculations for hours. No matter how I adjusted them, the result was the same. I couldn't afford it, at least not easily. The next morning, I opened a small wooden jewelry box. Inside sat the last valuable thing Daniel had ever given me. My wedding jewelry, pieces I hadn't touched since his funeral. I sold nearly all of it, every piece. The jeweler counted the money while I stared at the empty box. I felt like I was losing another part of my husband, but I never told Vanessa that. I simply paid her tuition. Years later, she graduated debt-free. Many parents would understand what that means. It means sacrifice. It means choosing your child's future over your own comfort. And I would have done it again. 1,000 times. After college, Vanessa moved to Atlanta. She built a successful career in marketing. She was smart, charismatic, ambitious. I was proud of her. Very proud. For a while, everything seemed fine. She called every Sunday. She visited on holidays. She asked my advice. She thanked me often. Then things started changing. Slowly at first. The phone calls became shorter. then less frequent. Eventually, they became obligations. Something she squeezed between meetings. Sorry, Mom. Busy week. Sorry, Mom. Traveling. Sorry, Mom. Maybe next month. I told myself that was normal. Children grow up. Lives become complicated. But then another change happened. One that hurt more. Vanessa stopped seeing me as a person. She started seeing me as a symbol, a reminder of where she came from, a reminder of the struggles she wanted to forget. The first time I noticed it was during a dinner with her coworkers. One woman asked what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Vanessa said, "My mom worked as a nurse forever. Forever." Not with pride, with embarrassment. As if being a nurse was something ordinary, something beneath the image she wanted to project. That night, I drove home with tears in my eyes. Not because of what she said, because of how she said it. I kept hoping it was temporary, a phase, a mistake. But the years continued, and the distance grew. When Vanessa married Richard, I helped pay for part of the wedding. Not because she asked, because I wanted to. When they struggled with the down payment on their first house, I quietly contributed money, again without asking for recognition. When Richard's first business nearly failed, I wrote another check. I told them it was a gift. I never expected repayment. Family doesn't keep score. At least I didn't. Yet somehow, despite all that support, a different story had emerged. A story where I was dependent. A story where Vanessa was the rescuer. A story everyone seemed to believe. My phone vibrated again. I looked down. Another message from Howard Bennett. "Alexis, please call me immediately. This cannot wait until tomorrow." My stomach tightened. Howard was not a dramatic man. If he called something urgent, it was urgent. I looked around the party. Vanessa stood near Richard now. The two of them were talking quietly, very quietly, too quietly. Then I noticed something. Richard looked worried, not stressed. Worried. The kind of expression people wear when money is involved. The kind of expression I had seen countless times during my years as a nurse speaking with anxious families. Fear. Real fear. Vanessa noticed me watching. For just a second, our eyes met, and something flashed across her face. Not affection, not guilt. Calculation. Then she smiled again. That perfect smile. The one she showed everyone else. The one hiding whatever she didn't want the world to see. I glanced at the envelope she had left on the table beside me. The thick stack of papers suddenly seemed far more important than before. Whatever was happening tonight wasn't random. Howard's urgent messages, Vanessa's strange behavior, the envelope, Richard's nervous expression. Somehow they were connected, and deep in my heart, I had the unsettling feeling that my daughter wasn't simply hiding the truth about my finances. She was hiding the truth about hers. I couldn't stop thinking about what my niece had said. Years. Vanessa had been telling people I was broke for years. Not strangers, not random acquaintances, family, friends, neighbors, business associates. An entire network of people had built their perception of me around a lie. And somehow, I had never known. The realization settled heavily in my chest as I sat near the pool watching guests move from conversation to conversation. I wasn't angry yet. I was hurt. There is a difference. Anger comes when someone attacks you. Pain comes when someone you love helps lead the attack. The jazz band began playing another song. Laughter floated across the backyard. Glasses clinked. The party continued. But for me, everything had changed. I suddenly felt like a guest at my own trial. and Vanessa was the prosecutor. A woman from across the yard approached me. I recognized her vaguely. She introduced herself as one of Vanessa's neighbors. Alexis, right? That's right. She smiled warmly. I've wanted to meet you. I forced a smile. That's very kind. She sat beside me. For a few moments, we chatted about Atlanta traffic and the weather. Then she lowered her voice. Can I ask you something personal? Immediately, my stomach tightened. Sure. She hesitated. Are you doing okay financially? There it was. Another reminder. Another piece of evidence. I looked at her carefully. What makes you ask? Her expression became uncomfortable. Oh, Vanessa mentioned you've had some struggles. Struggles. Interesting choice of word. What kind of struggles? The woman looked embarrassed. Well, she said you lost most of your retirement savings. I said nothing. She also said you've had trouble managing expenses. Still, I remained silent. The woman rushed to explain. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up. No, I replied softly. I'm glad you did. Because every conversation was revealing another piece of the puzzle. I thanked her for her concern. Then she returned to the party. As soon as she walked away, I closed my eyes for a moment. How many people had heard this version of my life 10, 20, 50, 100? The answer didn't really matter anymore. The damage had already been done. I remembered a family reunion 3 years earlier. At the time, I thought several relatives had been acting strangely. Too sympathetic. Too careful. One cousin had even slipped me $200. I had laughed and returned it immediately. At the time, I couldn't understand why she thought I needed money. Now I understood. Vanessa had already started spreading the story, and apparently everyone except me had heard it. A voice interrupted my thoughts. Mom! I looked up. Vanessa stood beside me again. This time her smile was thinner, more controlled. Can we talk? Of course. She sat down. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. That alone told me this conversation would be different. You're being quiet tonight. I almost laughed. What would you like me to say? She folded her arms. You seem upset. Do I? Yes. I looked directly into her eyes. Shouldn't I be? For the first time all evening, her expression shifted. Only slightly, but enough. Enough to tell me she knew exactly what I meant. Mom, people are having fun. At my expense. She sighed dramatically. Oh, come on. Vanessa. It's just jokes. I stared at her. No, jokes are funny. Her jaw tightened. You're being sensitive. That word. Sensitive. It has been used throughout history by people who hurt others and don't want accountability. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. You're imagining things. I had heard every version, and I was tired of all of them. Did you tell people I lost my savings? Her eyes widened briefly, then recovered. Who told you that? Interesting. Not a denial, a question. I waited. She looked away first. People talk. No, Vanessa. I kept my voice calm. People repeat what they've been told. The silence between us stretched. Finally, she stood. We'll talk later. No. She froze. For a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Nervousness. Not guilt. Nervousness. As though she was afraid the conversation might go somewhere dangerous. Mom, tonight isn't the right time. When is the right time? She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward the house, toward Richard. He was standing inside near the bar, watching us. The moment our eyes met, he quickly looked away. That bothered me a lot, because it suggested this wasn't just Vanessa's secret. Richard knew something too, maybe everything. Vanessa suddenly smiled again. The public smile, the performance smile. I have guests to entertain. Then she walked away. I watched her leave, and that's when I noticed something else. Richard immediately approached her. The two began speaking, fast, quietly, urgently. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Their body language said enough. They were worried. Very worried. The question was why. My phone vibrated again. Howard. A third message. Alexis, please call me immediately. This concerns Daniel's trust. Time sensitive. My heart skipped. Daniel's trust. I stared at the message. Suddenly, everything else faded. The music, the party, the conversations. Daniel's trust. Howard hadn't mentioned that trust in years. Not because it didn't exist. Because there had been no reason to. The trust had always remained exactly where Daniel intended. Protected. Quiet. Waiting. I slipped the phone back into my purse. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. The same instinct I had relied on for decades as a nurse was speaking loudly now. Something important had changed. Something significant enough for Howard to contact me repeatedly. And somehow, my daughter's behavior seemed connected to it. I stood and walked toward the house. Inside, the party felt louder than before, more crowded, more artificial. Near the dining room, I overheard another conversation. This time, it involved two distant relatives. Neither realized I was nearby. One of them laughed. Vanessa is a saint. The other nodded. I know, taking care of her mother like that. Most people wouldn't. My chest tightened. I almost kept walking. Instead, I stopped. What exactly has Vanessa told you? The two women jumped. Clearly, they hadn't expected me to hear them. One looked embarrassed. The other looked trapped. Finally, one answered. She said you've struggled financially since Mr. Ellis passed away. I nodded slowly. What else? The women exchanged glances. Neither wanted to continue, but eventually one spoke. She said she's been helping support you for years. There it was. The lie. Not implied, not suggested, stated directly. Support. As if I depended on her. As if all those checks I had quietly written over the years had never existed. As if all those sacrifices had been erased. I thanked them politely and walked away. But inside, something had shifted. The hurt was still there. But now something else had joined it. Clarity. For years, I had made excuses for Vanessa. Stress, work pressure, marriage problems, success changing people. Not anymore. Because lies told once are mistakes. Lies told for years are choices. And Vanessa had been choosing this story for a very long time. As I stepped outside again, my phone rang. Not a text. An actual call. Howard Bennett. My heart pounded. This time, I wasn't going to ignore it. I pressed accept and lifted the phone to my ear. But before I could speak, I heard someone calling my name behind me. And when I turned around, I saw Vanessa hurrying toward me, looking more alarmed than I had ever seen her before. Mom! Vanessa's voice cut through the noise of the party just as I answered Howard's call. I turned slightly away from the crowd. Howard! The relief in his voice was immediate. Thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you all evening. My pulse quickened. What's happened? Are you somewhere private? Before I could answer, Vanessa reached me. Mom, who are you talking to? I held up one finger. Just a moment. Her expression tightened. I walked several steps farther away toward the edge of the property. The music became quieter. The conversations faded into the background. Howard talked to me. There was a brief pause. Then he spoke carefully. Alexis, I need to ask you something important. All right. Have you signed any documents for Vanessa recently? My stomach dropped. I immediately looked toward the house. Vanessa was still watching me. Every nerve in my body suddenly became alert. No, I said. Why? Howard exhaled slowly. Good. Just one word. But it carried enough weight to make my heart race. What is going on? Several weeks ago, someone contacted our office requesting information regarding the Ellis family trust. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. The trust? Yes. A chill ran through me. Very few people even knew that trust existed. Howard continued. The requests became increasingly aggressive. Who made them? I can't discuss every detail over the phone. That answer told me everything. He knew exactly who. And the name was probably the same one sitting 20 feet away pretending to host a party. My eyes found Vanessa again. She was pretending to laugh with guests. Pretending. Because every few seconds she glanced toward me, watching, waiting, listening. Howard. My voice lowered. Does this involve Vanessa? Another pause. Too long. Then, Alexis, I strongly recommend you do not sign anything tonight. My stomach twisted. I looked toward the envelope she had shown me earlier. Suddenly it felt much heavier, much more dangerous. What exactly is in those papers? I don't know. That surprised me. I haven't seen them. Then how do you know? Because several things happened this week that concern me. His tone was calm, professional, but beneath it I heard something else. Urgency. Real urgency. Can you explain tomorrow? Tomorrow. First thing tomorrow morning. I frowned. Howard. Alexis. His voice sharpened. Please listen carefully. I stopped talking. If anyone asks you to sign anything tonight, don't. The seriousness in his voice frightened me. Not until we've met. For 30 years, Howard Bennett had never spoken to me that way. Not once. And suddenly, I knew this wasn't a routine legal issue. This was something much larger. I understand. Good. Then he added something that made my blood run cold. And Alexis? Yes. Daniel created the trust specifically to protect you. The words lingered. Protect you. Not Vanessa, not future grandchildren. Me. Protect you. Before I could ask another question, Howard continued. We'll talk tomorrow. The call ended. I stared at my phone. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The trust, protection, aggressive requests, documents, Vanessa. Somehow, all the pieces were beginning to connect, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Mom! I looked up. Vanessa was standing directly in front of me now. Her smile was back, but her eyes looked nervous. Who was that? I slipped my phone into my purse. An old friend? A lie. The first lie I'd told all evening, and judging by the look on her face, she knew it. Really? Yes. She folded her arms. You were talking for a long time. Was I? Mom. Her voice softened, too careful. Everything okay? There it was again. The performance. Concern wrapped around curiosity. Affection wrapped around suspicion. I smiled. Everything's fine. She didn't believe me, I could tell, but she couldn't challenge me without revealing her own anxiety. So instead, she shifted topics. About those papers. There they were. The papers again. My attention sharpened immediately. What about them? She glanced around before lowering her voice. It's nothing complicated. Of course, every dangerous document in history has been introduced with those exact words. It's nothing complicated. It's just paperwork. It's only a formality. Then why do you need my signature? Her smile flickered. Only briefly, but I noticed. Just estate planning. Estate planning. Another interesting choice of words. Estate planning for who? The family. Not an answer. I had spent decades reading people. Sick patients, scared families, doctors hiding bad news, administrators avoiding accountability. I knew evasion when I heard it, and Vanessa was evading. Heavily. Let me read it first. Her face changed immediately. Not dramatically. Just enough. A flash of disappointment. Gone almost instantly. But I saw it. Of course, she said. Take your time. Yet something in her voice suggested she didn't actually want me taking my time. She wanted a signature. Quickly. Before questions. Before lawyers. Before phone calls. Before tomorrow. The realization made me uneasy. Very uneasy. Richard appeared beside us. Everything okay? Vanessa answered too quickly. Perfect. Richard looked at me, then at Vanessa, then at the envelope resting on a nearby table. Something passed between them. Silent communication. The kind married couples develop after years together. A look. A warning. A concern. And suddenly I knew. Richard knew exactly what was happening. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Excuse me, I said. I picked up the envelope. It was thick, much thicker than a simple authorization form. My nursing instincts were screaming again. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I walked toward a quieter corner of the patio, sat down, and opened the envelope. Several pages. Legal language. Financial terms. Ownership structures. Transfer clauses. Most people would have skimmed. Most people would have trusted their child. But life had taught me something important. Read everything, especially when someone pressures you not to. The farther I read, the colder I became, because while I didn't fully understand every paragraph, I understood enough. This wasn't routine, not even close. Certain sections referenced future authority, financial oversight, decision-making rights, access to assets, control. The word control appeared far too often. I looked up. Vanessa was watching again. So was Richard. Neither smiled this time. Neither laughed. Neither looked relaxed. They looked like people waiting for an exam result, waiting for a verdict, waiting for something they desperately needed. And in that moment, another memory surfaced. 3 months earlier. Vanessa had called unexpectedly. She wanted to know whether I had updated my will. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Then, 6 weeks later, she asked if I had spoken to Howard recently. Again, I ignored it. Then another conversation. Then another. Each question had seemed harmless, but now placed together they formed a pattern. A very clear pattern. Vanessa hadn't suddenly become interested in my future. She had become interested in my assets. My phone vibrated once more. Another text from Howard. 3 words. Do not sign. I stared at the message, then at the papers, then at my daughter, and for the first time all evening, fear disappeared. In its place came something stronger: clarity. Whatever game Vanessa was playing, I was finally beginning to see the rules, and tomorrow I intended to learn the rest of them. I didn't sleep much that night. Even after I left Vanessa's party and drove home, my mind refused to quiet down. The roads were nearly empty. Atlanta's lights faded behind me as I headed toward the smaller town where I had lived for most of my adult life. Usually driving helped me think. Not this time. Questions kept circling through my head. Why was Howard so concerned? Why had Vanessa suddenly become obsessed with paperwork? Why had Richard looked terrified every time the envelope came up? And most importantly, what exactly was happening with Daniel's trust? By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was after midnight. My little house looked exactly the way it always had: simple, peaceful, comfortable, nothing fancy. The porch light glowed softly against the darkness. The flower beds needed attention. The shutters could probably use fresh paint, but it was home. And unlike many of the expensive things I'd seen at Vanessa's party, it was completely mine. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence felt comforting. No fake smiles, no gossip, no performance, just quiet. I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The envelope Vanessa had given me rested beside my mug. I stared at it for a long time. Then I reached into a nearby drawer. Inside sat an old photo album, one I hadn't opened in years. I found the picture I was looking for almost immediately. Daniel, standing beside a fishing boat, smiling, healthy, alive. I ran my fingers across the photograph. "You saw this coming, didn't you?" I whispered. Because suddenly I remembered a conversation from years earlier, one I hadn't thought about in a very long time. It happened shortly before Daniel died. Vanessa had been in college. She had just started talking about money constantly, not because she lacked it, because she was becoming fascinated by it. Status, success, appearances. Daniel noticed before I did. One evening, we were sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset, talking about our future. Daniel suddenly said something strange. "If anything ever happens to me, promise you'll be careful." I laughed. "Careful about what?" He looked toward the horizon. "People change when money becomes involved." At the time, I thought he meant strangers, business partners, investors, people outside the family. I never imagined he might have been talking about our own daughter. Back then, Vanessa was still sweet, still kind, still grateful, at least on the surface. But Daniel saw things others missed. That was one of the reasons he had been so successful. He understood human nature, including its darker side. A few weeks later, he introduced me to Howard Bennett. The meeting seemed routine at the time: estate planning, legal documents, trust structures, things most couples eventually discuss. But looking back now, I realized Daniel was being incredibly deliberate, painfully deliberate. He spent hours reviewing details, asking questions, adding provisions, changing clauses. I remember teasing him. "You're acting like a billionaire." He laughed. "Not a billionaire." Then he became serious. "A husband." At the time, I didn't understand. Now I was beginning to. The next morning, I arrived at Howard Bennett's office shortly after 9. His office occupied the top floor of an older brick building downtown. Howard greeted me personally. That alone was unusual. Normally, his assistant handled visitors. Today, Howard met me in the lobby himself, and the look on his face immediately confirmed my fears. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Alexis. Good morning. He nodded, but didn't smile. We walked directly into a private conference room. The moment the door closed, Howard placed several folders on the table. Then he sat down, slowly, carefully, like a doctor preparing to deliver difficult news. My stomach tightened. Howard. What happened? He folded his hands. For the past 3 months, we've received multiple inquiries regarding the Ellis family trust. I remained silent. He continued. Initially, we thought they were routine. Then someone began requesting information they shouldn't have known existed. My heart skipped. Who? Howard hesitated. Vanessa. Even though I had expected the answer, hearing it aloud still hurt. A lot. I looked away. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, how much does she know? More than she should. I stared at him. How is that possible? Howard opened one of the folders. Inside were copies of emails, letters, requests, legal inquiries, everything traced back to Vanessa, or people working on her behalf. The deeper I looked, the worse I felt. This wasn't curiosity. This was investigation. Systematic investigation. Months of it. Maybe longer. Why? The word barely left my lips. Howard's expression softened. I think you already know. Unfortunately, he was right. Money. The answer was money. It was always money. Howard opened another folder. This is where things become more concerning. My pulse quickened. He slid several documents across the table. I recognized some of the language immediately. The same language I'd seen inside the envelope. Control, authority, asset management, transfer rights. My eyes widened. These are related. Howard nodded. Exactly. A cold sensation moved through my chest. Vanessa hadn't randomly brought me paperwork. She had prepared it, carefully, strategically, possibly for months, and suddenly the timing of the party made perfect sense. A large gathering, social pressure, public expectations, embarrassment, all designed to make me compliant, to make me sign without reading. My heart sank, not because of the money, because of the planning, the manipulation, the intention. Howard leaned forward. Alexis, there's something else. I braced myself. What? He opened the final folder. Inside was a copy of Daniel's original trust agreement. I hadn't seen it in years. Howard pointed to a specific section. Daniel wrote this himself. I read the paragraph slowly, then again, then a third time. And when the meaning finally registered, I felt tears forming in my eyes. Daniel had anticipated exactly this possibility. Not specifically Vanessa, but greed, pressure, manipulation. Any attempt to take control away from me. The trust contained protections, layers of them. Safeguards designed specifically to prevent someone from forcing tricking or pressuring me into transferring assets. I looked up at Howard. He thought this might happen. Howard nodded. He worried about it. I swallowed hard. A mixture of sadness and gratitude washed over me. Even after all these years, Daniel was still protecting me, still looking after me, still standing between me and people who wanted something from me, even from beyond the grave. Then Howard said something that changed everything. Alexis, one of the assets inside the trust, directly affects the property where Vanessa currently lives. I froze. The room suddenly felt very quiet, very still. What do you mean? Howard took a slow breath. Then he answered, and the moment he did, I finally understood why Vanessa had become desperate. I sat frozen in my chair. Howard's words echoed through my mind. One of the assets inside the trust directly affects the property where Vanessa currently lives. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think. The house. Vanessa's house. The mansion she proudly showed off to everyone. The same mansion where she had spent the entire evening telling people I was broke. The same mansion where she had laughed while strangers pitied me. The same mansion where she had tried to pressure me into signing documents. Somehow, that house was connected to Daniel's trust. And judging by the look on Howard's face, the connection was significant. "What exactly are you saying?" I finally asked. Howard slid another document toward me. I read the first page, then the second, then the third. And slowly, the truth began revealing itself. 20 years earlier, when Vanessa and Richard purchased their first home, they didn't have enough money for the down payment. I already knew that part. What I didn't know was what happened afterward. Several years later, when they upgraded to a larger property, they again faced financial obstacles. This time, the situation had been worse. Far worse. Richard's business was struggling. Debt was increasing. Banks were hesitant. At the time, Daniel's trust had quietly stepped in through a complex investment arrangement, not as a gift, not as a loan, as a protected asset structure. The legal language was complicated, but the conclusion was simple. The trust maintained a substantial interest connected to the property, and the trustee responsible for approving any future transfers, modifications, or ownership changes was me. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. "Vanessa knows this?" Howard nodded. "I believe she recently discovered it." Recently. Everything suddenly made sense. The questions, the pressure, the paperwork, the party, the public humiliation, the sudden interest in my financial affairs. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. A painful realization settled over me. My daughter hadn't been trying to help me. She had been trying to gain control over something she couldn't access without me. Howard studied my expression carefully. "Alexis, are you okay?" I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes pain reaches a level where laughter becomes the only available response. "I don't know." For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then Howard opened another folder. "This may be difficult to hear." My stomach tightened again. There seemed to be an endless supply of difficult information today. "What now?" He slid several pages across the table. "Financial reports, loan summaries, business records. At least that's what they appeared to be." I frowned. "Richard's company, yes." The numbers were alarming, even to someone without a financial background. Losses, missed projections, outstanding obligations, debt. A lot of debt, much more than I expected. "How bad is it?" Howard hesitated, then answered honestly. "Worse than most people realize." I stared at the paperwork. Suddenly, I understood Richard's behavior at the party. The nervous glances, the tension, the forced smiles. He wasn't worried about appearances. He was worried about survival. His company was sinking, and Vanessa knew it, which meant their need for access to Daniel's trust wasn't about comfort. It was about rescue. They needed money, a lot of money, fast. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because they were struggling. I would have helped if they had come to me honestly. I always had. The pain came from the deception, the lies, the manipulation, the humiliation, all while secretly wanting something from me. Howard leaned forward. There's another reason I asked whether you'd signed anything. I looked up. What reason? His expression darkened. The documents Vanessa prepared would have given her significant authority over trust-related assets. I felt my heartbeat quicken. How significant? He paused, then answered carefully. Potentially enough to alter future decisions regarding certain properties. The room became silent. I understood exactly what he meant. The house, the trust, the assets, everything connected. And if I had signed those papers at the party, I might have handed over control without fully realizing it. A chill moved through me. Not fear, awareness. The kind of awareness that comes when someone narrowly avoids a disaster. Howard continued. Fortunately, Daniel anticipated scenarios like this. I glanced at the trust agreement again. Daniel, even after all these years, still protecting me, still thinking ahead, still seeing dangers before anyone else. The thought brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Howard waited patiently. Eventually, I smiled sadly. He knew people well. Howard smiled. Yes, he did. The meeting ended shortly before noon. I drove home in silence. The world outside my windshield seemed different now. Not because anything had changed, because I had. For years, I had blamed myself for the distance between Vanessa and me. Maybe I called too often. Maybe I worried too much. Maybe I embarrassed her somehow. Parents do that. We search for our own mistakes first, especially mothers who love their children. But now I was beginning to see something I had avoided for years. This wasn't my failure. This was Vanessa's choice, repeatedly, deliberately, over and over again. When I arrived home, Emily was sitting on my porch. My granddaughter stood as soon as she saw me. Grandma, I smiled immediately. Emily had Daniel's eyes, kind eyes, honest eyes, the kind that revealed emotions instead of hiding them. What are you doing here? She hugged me tightly, and unlike Vanessa's hugs, there was nothing performative about it. Just love. Simple love. I wanted to check on you. The concern in her voice nearly broke my heart. I'm okay. She pulled back slightly. No, you're not. Children often miss things. Emily never did. We sat together on the porch. For a while, we simply talked. Nothing serious. Coffee, work, her classes, life. Then she finally asked the question she'd clearly been holding back. Did Mom hurt you? I looked toward the street. The answer was obvious, but hearing it aloud felt different. Yes, Emily nodded slowly. I thought so. I studied her face. You knew, she sighed. Grandma, yeah. The sadness in her voice immediately worried me. What is it? Emily looked down at her hands. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. Mom's been talking about your money for months. Months, not days, not weeks, months. I closed my eyes briefly. Every conversation seemed to confirm the same painful truth. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't stress. It was planning. Emily continued. I heard her talking to Dad. I remained silent. She kept saying everything would be okay if you signed. The words landed heavily. Everything would be okay if you signed. Not if they worked harder. Not if they solved their problems. Not if they changed their spending. If I signed. The implication was impossible to ignore. Emily reached for my hand. I'm sorry. I squeezed her fingers gently. None of this is your fault. But as we sat there together, another realization formed, one that frightened me more than anything Howard had shown me. Vanessa wasn't finished. Not yet. People who spend months chasing something don't usually walk away easily. And if she was desperate enough to humiliate her own mother in front of 50 guests, there was no telling what she might try next. 3 days passed before Vanessa called. 3 days of silence. 3 days without excuses. 3 days without manipulation. 3 days without hearing my daughter's voice. Part of me hoped she had finally reflected on everything. Another part knew better. The call came just after lunch. I was watering flowers in my backyard when my phone rang. Vanessa. I stared at the screen for several seconds, then answered. Hello? Her voice sounded unusually soft. Mom? Vanessa. A pause. How are you? I almost laughed. For years, conversations between us had skipped directly to what she wanted. Now suddenly, she wanted to know how I was. I'm fine. Good. Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, she spoke again. Can we meet? There it was. The real reason. Not an apology. Not concern. A meeting. I glanced toward the garden. What for? I just want to talk. I waited. She added nothing. About what? Another silence. Then, the future. That single word told me everything. I agreed to meet her the following afternoon. Not because I trusted her, because I needed answers. And sometimes answers only reveal themselves when people think they're still in control. The next day, I arrived at a small cafe near downtown Atlanta. Vanessa was already there, waiting. She wore designer clothes, perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect smile. But something had changed. Her confidence looked strained, fragile, like a house standing after a storm. Technically intact, yet one strong wind away from collapse. I sat across from her. For a few moments, we exchanged small talk. Weather, traffic, coffee. Neither of us cared about any of it. Eventually, Vanessa leaned forward. Mom, here we go? Yes. I think we've had some misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. Interesting choice of word. Not lies, not betrayal, not humiliation. Misunderstandings. I took a sip of coffee, then set down the cup. What kind of misunderstandings? She shifted slightly. The party. The party where you told everyone I was broke. Her smile disappeared immediately. Good. For once, honesty was entering the conversation. I was joking. No. My voice remained calm. You weren't. She looked away, only briefly, then back at me. People took it too seriously. I stared at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to protect her from consequences. No, Vanessa, I said quietly. They took it exactly as you intended. The silence that followed felt heavy. She wasn't expecting resistance. She was expecting the version of me she had always relied upon. The mother who forgave quickly. The mother who absorbed pain quietly. The mother who chose peace over truth. That woman was still here, but she was no longer willing to be manipulated. Vanessa changed tactics. I watched it happen in real time. The expression, the posture, the tone. Years of motherhood had made me an expert on my daughter, and right now she was adjusting her strategy. Mom, let's not argue. There it was, the classic retreat. When the facts become uncomfortable, redefine the conversation. Let's not argue. I smiled sadly. I'm not arguing. She folded her hands together. Good. Then came the next move. The documents I gave you. Of course, we had finally arrived. The real reason for this meeting, not reconciliation, paperwork. I leaned back. What about them? They need to be signed. There was no hesitation now. No pretending. No subtlety. Just direct pressure. I studied her carefully. You seem very eager. Her jaw tightened. It's important. Why? It's complicated. No. I shook my head. It isn't. The frustration appeared instantly. For years, Vanessa had controlled conversations. Now she couldn't, and she hated it. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered 50 people laughing while she painted me as a burden. The sympathy disappeared. Vanessa lowered her voice. Mom, I know you've spoken with Howard. My attention sharpened. Interesting. Very interesting. I kept my face neutral. Have I? Please. The word came out more sharply than intended. There it was. Fear. Finally. Real fear. Not embarrassment. Not guilt. Fear. And fear tells the truth more often than words do. What exactly are you worried about? She hesitated. Then, nothing. A lie. An obvious one. I remained silent. People often reveal more when confronted with silence than questions. Eventually, she continued talking, trying to fill the space, trying to regain control. Howard doesn't understand everything. I almost laughed. Howard had spent 30 years managing the trust. If anyone understood everything, it was him. But I let her continue. He doesn't know what's best for the family. Family? Another interesting word, because somehow family always seemed to mean Vanessa. Never me, never anyone else. Just Vanessa, and whatever Vanessa wanted. I looked directly into her eyes. What is it you need from me? The question landed harder than she expected. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then her shoulders sagged slightly. The performance was cracking. Finally. We have some financial pressure. There it was. The first honest sentence she'd spoken. Not complete honesty, but a start. How much pressure? Her eyes dropped to the table. That alone answered part of the question. A lot. A very lot. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded smaller. We've had some setbacks. I remembered the reports Howard showed me. Setbacks. What a gentle word for disaster. I waited. She continued. Richard's company has been struggling. I already knew that. How badly? The answer never came, because at that exact moment, Vanessa's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and everything changed. The color drained from her face. Completely. Instantly. Panic. Pure panic. She rejected the call. 2 seconds later, it rang again. Same number. She rejected it again. Then it rang a third time. Her hands were shaking now. Actually shaking. I had never seen Vanessa like this. Never. Who is it? I asked. No one. Lie. The worst one yet. Because no one looks terrified of no one. The phone rang again. And before she could stop herself, I saw the caller ID reflected in the cafe window. The name meant nothing to me, but the company did. A commercial lending firm, one that specialized in high-risk business debt. My stomach tightened. Vanessa followed my gaze, realized what I'd seen. And suddenly I understood. The situation was even worse than Howard believed. Much worse. The phone finally stopped ringing. Vanessa stared down at the screen, breathing heavily. For the first time in years, she looked exactly like the frightened little girl who used to wait for me outside the hospital after long shifts. Lost, overwhelmed, scared. For one brief moment, I saw my daughter again. The real one. Not the mask. Not the ambition. Not the arrogance. Just fear. And then, my own phone rang. I looked down. The caller ID displayed a name I immediately recognized. Margaret Sullivan, Regional President, the bank managing the Ellis Family Trust. My heart skipped, because Margaret never called without a reason. And judging by the timing, that reason was about to change everything. For a few seconds, I simply stared at my phone. Margaret Sullivan, Regional President of the bank managing the Ellis Family Trust. Vanessa saw the name too. I knew she did. Because the moment I looked up, she was staring directly at my screen. And the fear in her eyes intensified. Not confusion, not curiosity. Recognition. She knew exactly who Margaret was, which meant she knew far more about the trust than she had admitted. I answered. Margaret. Alexis. Her voice sounded professional as always, but there was urgency beneath it. Do you have a moment? I do. Margaret hesitated. Are you alone? I glanced at Vanessa. She was practically holding her breath. No, I said honestly. I'm with my daughter. Another pause, then Margaret spoke carefully. In that case, I'll keep this brief. My stomach tightened. What happened? Several transactions connected to trust-related assets have triggered review procedures. I immediately understood two things. First, something serious was happening. Second, Margaret was choosing her words very carefully because Vanessa was sitting right across from me. What kind of review procedures? Margaret lowered her voice. Alexis, I strongly recommend scheduling an in-person meeting as soon as possible. I heard Vanessa's chair move, just slightly. She was trying to listen, trying not to appear obvious, trying and failing. Is there a problem? I asked. Potentially. My pulse quickened. Margaret continued. Nothing has been approved. Those 4 words seemed important, very important. Nothing has been approved, which meant someone had attempted something requiring approval, something involving trust assets, and that attempt had failed. I looked directly at Vanessa. The color was draining from her face again. Margaret continued. We need your authorization before moving forward with several matters. Authorization. Another word that made Vanessa visibly tense. I thanked Margaret and agreed to meet with her later that week. Then the call ended. Silence settled over the table. Vanessa spoke first. What did she want? I almost admired her determination. Almost. Even now. Even after everything. She was still pretending. Bank business. Her jaw tightened. Related to the trust. Interesting. Not what trust, not surprise, not confusion, confirmation. She knew. At least partially. I leaned back. Why would you ask that? For a brief moment, she had no answer. Then she recovered. Too late. I'd already seen enough. I just assumed. No. I shook my head. You didn't assume. The silence returned. Longer this time. Finally, Vanessa sighed. The sound carried exhaustion. Weeks. Months. Maybe years of pressure. Whatever she had built around herself was beginning to crack. Mom! What? She stared out the cafe window, and for the first time, the confidence disappeared completely. We have problems. There it was. Not the full truth, but closer than we'd been before. I waited. She continued. Richard's company isn't doing well. I already knew that, but I said nothing. People often keep talking when silence makes them uncomfortable, and Vanessa was becoming very uncomfortable. We've lost several contracts. Still not the whole story. I waited. The market changed. Not the whole story. Still waiting. She looked down. We owe money. There it was. Finally. Not everything, but enough. How much? Her eyes widened. She wasn't expecting direct questions. Not from me. Not anymore. I asked again. How much? Several seconds passed. Then more than we expected, which usually means far more than people are willing to admit. I remembered the financial reports Howard had shown me. The numbers had been staggering. Business debt, commercial loans, personal guarantees, millions. Not thousands, millions. And suddenly, another puzzle piece clicked into place. The mansion, the luxury cars, the expensive parties, the designer clothing. It wasn't wealth. It was image. An image financed by debt. An image Vanessa desperately needed people to believe. Because if the image collapsed, everything else might collapse with it. I looked at my daughter carefully. For years, I had envied parts of her life. Not consciously, but occasionally. The beautiful home, the expensive vacations, the apparent success. Now I realized much of it had been smoke. Expensive smoke, but smoke nonetheless. Vanessa rubbed her forehead. I was trying to fix things. The sentence surprised me. Not because of the words, because of the honesty. Tiny honesty. But honesty. By lying about me. Her eyes closed briefly. Pain flashed across her face. Good. Maybe she was finally beginning to understand. Maybe. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I almost laughed. People rarely mean for lies to go far. They simply keep feeding them. One lie becomes 2. 2 becomes 10. 10 becomes a lifestyle. And eventually they forget where truth ended. I leaned forward. How long have you been telling people I'm broke? She couldn't answer. That answer alone told me everything. Long enough. Far too long. Her phone buzzed again. The same lender. The same number. The same fear. This time, she didn't even look at it. She simply silenced it. I noticed her hands trembling. Not dramatically, just enough. Fear again. Real fear. Then something unexpected happened. My daughter started crying. Not loudly, not theatrically. Quiet tears. The kind people don't plan. The kind that appear when exhaustion finally wins. For a moment, I saw the 13-year-old girl who sat beside me after Daniel's funeral. The frightened child asking what would happen next. And suddenly, my anger softened. Not disappeared. Softened. Because beneath all the arrogance, beneath the lies, beneath the manipulation, was still a human being, a flawed one, a selfish one. But a human being. Unfortunately, compassion does not erase consequences, and some lessons can only be learned through loss. Vanessa wiped her eyes, then whispered something that shocked me. Richard thinks the house is our only chance. I froze. There it was. The house, again. The center of everything. The thing everyone kept circling around. The thing nobody wanted to discuss directly. I remembered Howard's warning. The trust. The property. The ownership structure. The signatures. Everything connected. Your only chance for what? Vanessa looked away. The answer clearly frightened her, which meant it was probably worse than I imagined. Finally, she spoke. To save everything. Everything, a dangerous word. Businesses, reputation, marriage, debt, status, lifestyle, maybe all of it. I sat quietly, thinking, listening, observing. Years as a nurse had taught me something important. People reveal the most when they're desperate, and Vanessa was desperate, truly desperate. Then she looked directly into my eyes and asked the question she'd wanted to ask from the beginning, the question hiding behind every phone call, every lie, every document, every conversation. Mom, her voice cracked. Will you help us? The cafe suddenly felt very quiet, very still, because for the first time since this entire nightmare began, my daughter wasn't asking for a signature. She was asking for salvation, and I wasn't sure she deserved it. I didn't answer Vanessa immediately. Instead, I looked out the cafe window. People walked along the sidewalk. Cars passed. Life continued as normal. Yet my own world felt suspended between two possibilities. One path led toward forgiveness, the other toward consequences. The difficult part was knowing that sometimes both are necessary. Vanessa waited. Her eyes never left mine. Mom, I finally spoke. I have helped you before. She nodded quickly. Yeah, when you needed tuition. Another nod. When you needed money for your wedding. Yes. When you needed help buying your first house. Her eyes dropped. Yes. When Richard's first company nearly collapsed. Silence. That answer alone was enough. I leaned forward. So tell me something honestly. For the first time all afternoon, she looked genuinely afraid. What? Why didn't you simply ask me for help? The question landed hard. Harder than accusations. Harder than anger. Because there was no escape from it. Why? Why the lies? Why the manipulation? Why the humiliation? Why months of planning instead of one honest conversation? Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. I didn't think you'd understand. I stared at her, and suddenly I understood the real tragedy. Not the debt, not the trust, not even the betrayal. The tragedy was that somewhere along the way, my daughter had stopped seeing me as her mother. I had become a resource, an obstacle, a signature, an asset, anything except the woman who loved her. I stood up. The conversation was over, at least for now. Mom! I picked up my purse. We'll talk again. Please. Her voice cracked. I need your help. I looked at her carefully, and for the first time, I saw desperation without arrogance. But desperation alone wasn't enough. Not anymore. Then I left. The following morning, I met Margaret Sullivan. The bank's regional headquarters occupied an impressive glass building overlooking downtown Atlanta. Everything about the place projected stability, strength, control. 3 things currently missing from Vanessa's life. Margaret greeted me personally. Unlike Howard, she had always been warm, professional, but warm. She led me into a private conference room. Several documents were already waiting on the table. The moment the door closed, Margaret became serious. Alexis, thank you for coming. I take it this couldn't wait. No, her answer came immediately. My stomach tightened. Margaret opened a file. Inside were documents bearing names I recognized. Richard Harper, Harper Development Group, commercial lending agreements, property records, loan obligations, and then I saw it. The mansion. Vanessa's mansion. The property at the center of everything. Margaret slid the documents toward me. I think you need to see these. I began reading. The farther I read, the worse the situation became. Richard's company wasn't struggling. It was collapsing. Several major projects had failed. Investors had withdrawn. Credit lines had been reduced. Deadlines had been missed. And most alarming of all, personal guarantees had been triggered. Meaning Richard wasn't just risking his company. He was risking everything, including the house. I slowly lowered the papers. How close are they? Margaret answered without hesitation. Very close. The room became quiet. I thought back to the lavish party, the expensive cars, the luxury clothes, the carefully curated image. The entire thing had been built on top of a financial sinkhole. Margaret continued. There's something else. I wasn't sure I wanted more information, but I nodded anyway. She opened another folder. Inside sat a collection of requests, formal requests, submitted over several months, requests connected to trust assets. Every single one had been denied. My eyes widened. Vanessa submitted these through representatives. I felt my chest tighten. The dates stretched back nearly a year. A year, not weeks, not months, a year. She had been pursuing access to the trust for an entire year. Without telling me, without asking, without honesty. Margaret pointed toward one particular request. This one concerned the property. The mansion. Again, always the mansion. I studied the paperwork carefully. Then I finally understood. Vanessa and Richard believed that gaining influence over trust-controlled assets could help them restructure debt, save the house, save the company, save their lifestyle. The trust had become their lifeboat, and I was the gatekeeper. Margaret folded her hands. There is one more thing. I braced myself. What? She looked directly at me. The trust owns a larger portion of that property than they realize. I froze. What do you mean? Margaret slid a final document across the table. I stared at the numbers, then read them again and again, because surely I had misunderstood. But I hadn't. The trust's interest in the property was substantial, far more substantial than anyone outside the trust likely knew, including Richard. Possibly even Vanessa. My pulse quickened. Everything suddenly made sense. The panic, the pressure, the paperwork, the lies, the desperation. Without access to me, they had no realistic way to control what happened next. Margaret leaned forward. Alexis, there's a reason I'm telling you this personally. I looked up. Why? Her expression softened. Because the next decision belongs entirely to you. The words hung in the air. Entirely to you. Not the bank, not Howard, not Vanessa. Me. For years, I had given away pieces of my power. Not legally. Emotionally. I avoided conflict. I forgave too quickly. I accepted disrespect to preserve peace. But this decision couldn't be avoided, and everyone knew it. Then the conference room door opened. A receptionist stepped inside. Excuse me. Margaret turned. Yes. The receptionist hesitated, then looked directly at me. There's a gentleman here asking for Alexis Ellis. My heart skipped. Margaret frowned. Who? The receptionist checked her notes. Howard Bennett. That wasn't surprising. Howard and Margaret often worked together. What surprised me was the expression on the receptionist's face. Concern. Real concern. Margaret noticed it too. What is it? The receptionist swallowed. He's brought additional documents. Silence. Important documents. My pulse accelerated. Margaret exchanged a look with me, then back with the receptionist. What kind of documents? The answer changed everything. Documents connected to attempted transfers, attempted asset control, and signatures. Signatures that appeared to have my name on them, even though I had never signed a thing. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I stared at the receptionist. The receptionist stared at Margaret. Margaret stared at me. And my heart pounded harder with every passing moment. Signatures, my signatures. On documents I had never signed, the very idea sounded impossible. Yet the expression on Margaret's face told me this was not a misunderstanding. This was serious, very serious. "Send him in," Margaret said. The receptionist nodded and disappeared. The conference room felt smaller suddenly, more tense, more dangerous. I looked down at the documents scattered across the table. Years ago, if someone had told me I would be sitting in a bank discussing unauthorized paperwork connected to my own daughter, I would have laughed. Not because it was ridiculous, because it was unimaginable. Yet here I was. A few moments later, the door opened. Howard Bennett entered carrying a thick leather briefcase. His face looked grim, far grimmer than usual. That alone told me everything. Whatever he had found wasn't good. "Howard." "Alexis." He sat beside me. Margaret closed the door. Then Howard carefully removed several folders from his briefcase. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The atmosphere already said enough. Finally, Howard opened the first folder. "These were submitted through a third-party consultant approximately 6 weeks ago." He slid the papers toward me. I looked down. My name appeared multiple times. Alexis Ellis, trustee, beneficiary, authorized party. All accurate, at least until I reached the signature line. My stomach dropped, because there it was, my signature, or at least something attempting to look like my signature. I picked up the page, studied it, then shook my head. "I didn't sign this." Howard nodded. "I know!" The room became quiet again. I stared at the document. The signature looked convincing at first glance. But it wasn't mine. The loops were wrong. The spacing was wrong. The pressure points were wrong. Tiny details. But enough. After nearly 70 years of writing my name, I knew exactly what it looked like. And that wasn't it. Margaret folded her hands. "The bank identified inconsistencies during verification." Thank God. A shiver moved through my body. If they hadn't, I didn't want to think about it. Howard opened another folder, then another, then another. The pattern quickly became obvious. Multiple requests, multiple attempts, multiple documents, all connected to trust assets, property interests, authorization rights, financial control, each containing variations of the same thing, a signature pretending to be mine. I felt physically sick. Not because of the paperwork, because of what it implied. Someone had not simply lied. Someone had planned. Someone had prepared. Someone had crossed a line. And deep down, I already knew who had benefited from those attempts. The question was whether Vanessa knew, or whether someone else had acted without her knowledge. I wanted desperately to believe the second possibility. Desperately, but the evidence wasn't helping. Howard leaned forward. "We are not accusing anyone at this stage." I nodded. Of course, lawyers chose words carefully, especially Howard. "But..." His expression hardened. But whoever submitted these documents clearly believed they would gain access to trust-related authority if they succeeded. I looked at the papers again, then at Margaret, then at Howard. "Can we trace where they came from?" Howard exchanged a glance with Margaret. Not a good sign. Finally, he answered, "Yes." My pulse accelerated. "And—" Another pause, long enough to hurt. The consultant was hired through a company associated with Richard Harper. The room fell silent, completely silent. Richard, not Vanessa. Richard. I closed my eyes. A strange mixture of emotions flooded through me. Relief, fear, confusion, hope. Relief because perhaps Vanessa hadn't gone quite as far as I feared. Fear because Richard apparently had. Confusion because I no longer knew who was manipulating whom. Hope because maybe, just maybe, there was still a version of this story where my daughter hadn't crossed every line. Then Howard continued, and that hope disappeared. "The payments originated from a joint account." Joint account. Vanessa and Richard. Both names. Both connected. The room blurred for a moment. I stared at the table, trying to process it, trying to reconcile two different versions of my daughter. The little girl who waited outside hospitals, and the woman sitting across from lenders trying to save a collapsing lifestyle. The little girl who once wrote me Mother's Day cards, and the woman who told 50 guests I was broke. The gap between those two people suddenly felt enormous. Howard carefully closed one folder, then opened another. "This is where things become even more important." I wasn't sure my heart could handle more important, but I nodded anyway. Inside the folder sat records. Years of records. Checks, transfers, deposits, receipts, financial history. My financial history. Vanessa's financial history. The history nobody else knew. Howard looked directly at me. "Alexis, I believe it's time you decide how much truth you want revealed." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret answered. "If legal proceedings become necessary, everything becomes discoverable." Everything. The word hung heavily in the room. Everything. The tuition payments, the wedding assistance, the house contributions, the business bailouts, the gifts, the sacrifices, all of it. Years of support, years of quiet generosity, years Vanessa had erased from her version of events. Suddenly, I understood. The lies weren't just morally wrong, they were factually impossible. Because documentation existed. A mountain of documentation. Proof. Actual proof. Howard slid a thick packet toward me. I opened it and immediately felt tears sting my eyes. There they were. Checks I'd forgotten writing. Transfers I'd barely remembered. Records stretching back decades. College tuition. Graduate school expenses. Wedding costs. Mortgage assistance. Emergency loans. Medical bills. Business support. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over many years. Quietly given. Freely given. Never discussed. Never weaponized. Never held over anyone's head. Because that's what parents do. We help. We sacrifice. We give. Then we move on. Yet seeing everything together created a different picture. Not of a helpless mother supported by her daughter, but of a mother who had carried her daughter repeatedly, financially, emotionally, practically, for years. Howard watched me carefully. "You never told anyone, did you?" I shook my head. "Why would I?" He smiled sadly. "Exactly." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Margaret said something unexpected. "There's someone else you should think about." I looked up. "Who?" "Emily." "My granddaughter. the one person in this entire mess who had shown genuine compassion. Margaret continued, "Whatever happens next will affect her too." She was right, very right, because this wasn't only about Vanessa anymore. Families are complicated, consequences spread, truth spreads too. And suddenly I realized something important. I wasn't deciding whether to expose Vanessa. I was deciding what kind of family story would survive after all of this ended. A story built on lies, or a story built on truth. The answer seemed obvious, yet it still hurt. Then Howard received a text message. He glanced at the screen, and his expression immediately changed. "What is it?" I asked. Howard slowly looked up, then spoke 4 words that made my stomach drop. "Vanessa is here." Vanessa is here. Those 3 words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I was afraid, because I wasn't ready. Not ready to see her. Not ready to hear another explanation. Not ready to watch her choose between honesty and self-preservation. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Howard quietly closed the folder in front of him. Margaret folded her hands, and I took a slow breath. "Does she know I'm here?" I asked. Howard nodded. Yes, of course she did. Vanessa had always been resourceful when she wanted something. Finding me was probably the easiest task she'd faced all month. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk out, to avoid another confrontation. But another part knew this moment had been coming for a long time. Years, perhaps. "Send her in," I said. Margaret looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" "No." I smiled sadly. "But do it anyway." A minute later, the door opened. Vanessa stepped inside, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, she didn't look polished. Her hair was slightly out of place. Her makeup couldn't completely hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Her shoulders sagged. The confident executive was gone. The socialite was gone. The woman who had laughed at me in front of 50 guests was gone. All that remained was someone who looked tired. Very tired. She stopped when she saw Howard and Margaret. Then she saw the documents spread across the table. Immediately, her face turned pale. She understood. Maybe not every detail, but enough. The room became silent. Painfully silent. Finally, she looked at me. "Mom." I didn't answer. Not immediately. I simply waited. Years of nursing taught me that silence often reveals more than questions. People rush to fill silence, especially guilty people. Vanessa proved the rule almost instantly. "I can explain." There it was. The universal sentence spoken moments before explanations become excuses. Howard remained silent. Margaret remained silent. I remained silent. Vanessa swallowed hard, then sat down. For several seconds, she stared at the table, then at the documents, then at me. And suddenly, tears appeared. Real tears, not dramatic ones, not performative ones. The kind people can't control. The kind they hate showing. For a moment, I saw my daughter. Not the version she'd become. The version she used to be. The little girl who cried when Daniel died. The teenager who hugged me after graduation. The young woman who once promised she would never forget everything I'd done for her. That memory hurt. A lot. Because somewhere along the way, she had forgotten. Or perhaps she had simply stopped caring. Finally, she spoke. "I never wanted this." The statement hung in the air. I looked directly at her. "Then what did you want?" She closed her eyes, and for the first time there was no immediate answer. No prepared speech. No clever response. Just silence. The truth is often difficult because it refuses to arrive quickly. Eventually, she whispered, I wanted everything to stop falling apart. There it was. Not greed, not power. Fear. Raw fear. The fear of losing everything she had spent years building. Unfortunately, fear can make people do terrible things. I knew that better than most. I had seen it in hospital rooms, emergency rooms, waiting rooms. Fear changes people, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. Then why lie about me? The question landed heavily. Vanessa lowered her head. No defense, no excuse, no argument, just shame. For the first time. Actual shame. A long silence followed, then she finally answered. Because it was easier. The honesty shocked me. Even Howard looked surprised. Vanessa continued. If people thought you needed me... She stopped. Tears filled her eyes again. I finished the sentence for her. Then they wouldn't ask why you needed me. She nodded, slowly, painfully, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The lies weren't random. They weren't designed to humiliate me. At least, not originally. They were designed to protect her image. If everyone believed I depended on her, nobody would suspect the opposite. Nobody would ask difficult questions. Nobody would notice how often I had quietly rescued her. The lie had become a shield. Then eventually, it became a habit. Then eventually, it became her reality. I leaned back, exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The entire situation felt tragic, because it was. Howard finally spoke. Vanessa. She looked up. His voice remained calm, professional. Did you authorize attempts to access trust-controlled assets? The question landed like a hammer. The room instantly became tense. Vanessa froze. For several seconds, she couldn't answer. Then she nodded. A tiny movement, but enough. Howard continued. Did you know documents were submitted containing signatures that did not belong to Alexis? Vanessa's eyes widened. Immediately. Genuinely. Not fake, not calculated. Genuine shock. No. The answer came instantly. Too instantly to be rehearsed. Everyone noticed. Howard leaned forward. You didn't know? No. She shook her head repeatedly. I swear. The fear in her voice sounded real. Very real. Howard exchanged a glance with Margaret, then asked the question everyone was thinking. If not you, then who? The answer came almost immediately. Richard? The room fell silent, completely silent. I felt my heart sink, not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. Deep down, I had begun suspecting exactly that. Vanessa continued. He kept telling me he could fix everything. Tears streamed down her face now. He said we were running out of time. Howard remained expressionless. Did you know what he was doing? She shook her head. Not all of it. Not all of it. An important answer. Not innocence, not guilt. Something in between. The gray area where most human failures live. I stared at my daughter, trying to understand her, trying to understand how we arrived here. Years of sacrifice, years of love, years of support. And now we were discussing forged documents in a conference room. Life can be cruel that way. Then Vanessa whispered something that changed everything. Something nobody expected. Something that immediately explained why she looked so terrified. Richard left. The room froze. "What?" I asked. She wiped her eyes. "He left yesterday." No one spoke. Vanessa continued. "The lenders are coming after him." Her voice broke. "The company is finished." Another silence, then, "And he's blaming me." The confession shattered whatever remained of her composure. For the first time since this story began, I wasn't looking at an arrogant daughter. I was looking at a broken woman. A woman who had made terrible choices. A woman facing consequences. A woman who had finally run out of people to blame. Except herself. And suddenly I understood the real twist. The thing Vanessa feared most wasn't losing money. It wasn't losing the house. It wasn't losing status. It was realizing that after destroying trust with everyone around her, she might end up completely alone. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Vanessa sat across from me crying quietly. Howard remained still. Margaret watched carefully, and I found myself staring at my daughter, wondering how we had traveled so far from where we began. Richard left. The words echoed through my mind. Not because I felt sympathy for him. I didn't, at least not much. But because his departure revealed something important. The illusion was finally collapsing. The company, the marriage, the image, the lies. Everything Vanessa had spent years building was beginning to fall apart at the same time. And now there was nowhere left to hide. Eventually, I spoke. "Where did he go?" Vanessa wiped her eyes. "I don't know." The answer sounded honest. "He packed a suitcase." Another pause. "Then he left." I studied her face. For once, there was no performance, no strategy, no manipulation, just exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying too many secrets for too long. Howard finally broke the silence. "Vanessa, I need to ask something directly." She nodded weakly. "Okay." Did Richard know the documents contained unauthorized signatures? The question hung heavily in the room. Vanessa stared at the table, then slowly nodded. "Yes." Margaret's expression hardened immediately. I wasn't surprised. Neither was Howard. "Did he create them?" Another pause. Then, "I think so." The words barely escaped her lips. My stomach sank, not because it was shocking, because it confirmed what I already feared. Richard hadn't simply made bad business decisions. He had crossed legal and ethical lines. Dangerous lines. Vanessa continued. "He kept saying we were out of options." I closed my eyes briefly. Out of options. One of the oldest justifications in the world. People say it before making terrible choices. They say it before betraying trust, before stealing, before lying, before convincing themselves that wrong somehow becomes acceptable. But the truth is simple. Being desperate explains behavior. It doesn't excuse it. Howard leaned forward. Vanessa listened carefully. She looked up. "If these documents had been processed successfully, the consequences could have been severe." She nodded. "I know." "No." Howard's voice remained calm, but firm. "I don't think you do." The room became quiet again. Then Howard continued. "There could have been criminal investigations." Vanessa's face turned white. "There could have been civil litigation." Whiter. "There could have been permanent financial consequences." By now, she looked physically ill. For the first time, I think she truly understood how close everything had come to disaster. Not financial disaster, legal disaster. A completely different thing. Margaret finally spoke. "Fortunately, safeguards worked exactly as intended." I immediately thought of Daniel, his planning, his caution, his foresight. Years ago, I used to tease him for being overly careful. Now I silently thanked him, again and again and again. Because even after death, he was still protecting our family from itself. A painful irony. Vanessa looked at me. Really looked at me. Not at a signature, not at an asset, not at a solution. At me. Her mother. The woman sitting across from her. The woman she'd hurt. The woman she'd lied about. The woman she'd spent years taking for granted. "Mom!" Her voice trembled. I waited. Then she said something I had been waiting years to hear. "I'm sorry." The room fell silent. No one interrupted. No one moved. Because everyone understood the importance of those words. Not the words themselves, the sincerity behind them. I studied her face carefully. Years of nursing had made me skeptical. People apologize for many reasons. To escape consequences, to gain sympathy, to manipulate, to negotiate. But sometimes people apologize because they finally understand the damage they've caused. This felt like the second kind. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Tears filled her eyes again. I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone. Her voice cracked. I kept saying that. I listened, quietly. It started small. A sad smile appeared. The first lie. Then disappeared. Then another. I nodded slowly, because that's how it always happens. Almost nobody begins with a giant betrayal. Most betrayals start tiny. Small enough to justify. Small enough to ignore. Then they grow, and grow, and grow. Until one day, you no longer recognize yourself. Vanessa continued. I hated when people asked how we afforded everything. There it was. The real issue. Appearances, status, image. The same poison that had been slowly working through her life for years. Everyone assumed we were successful. She laughed bitterly. We wanted them to. The confession sounded painfully honest. The bigger the problems became, another pause. The more we pretended. I looked at her carefully, because I suddenly realized something. Vanessa hadn't only lied to others, she had been lying to herself. For years. Perhaps even longer than anyone realized. Howard quietly gathered several folders, giving us space, giving us privacy. Understanding this was no longer primarily a legal conversation. It was a family conversation, a much harder thing. Eventually, Vanessa whispered, "Do you hate me?" The question broke my heart, because only deeply damaged relationships create questions like that. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, the frightened little girl, the ambitious young woman, the successful professional, the struggling wife, the liar, the victim of her own choices. All of them existed simultaneously. Human beings are complicated that way. No, her shoulders immediately shook with emotion. I don't hate you. More tears. I'm disappointed. Even more tears. I'm hurt. She nodded. I know. Then I added the most important truth. But I still love you. Vanessa broke completely. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just honestly. Years of pressure. Years of fear. Years of pretending. Finally collapsing. And for the first time in a very long while, I reached across the table and held her hand. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Some moments are too important for words. After several minutes, Howard cleared his throat gently, reluctantly, almost apologetically. There is one issue we still need to address. Reality returning. Everyone knew it. Vanessa slowly straightened. The house? Howard nodded. The house. Always the house. The center of everything. The symbol of everything. Pride. Debt. Image. Lies. Consequences. Howard opened one final folder, then looked directly at me. Alexis. My stomach tightened. Yes. A decision must be made regarding the property's future. The room became silent again, because everyone understood what that meant. The trust's ownership interest, the debt, the defaults, the legal protections. Everything now led back to one unavoidable reality. The next chapter of this story would depend entirely on my choice, and whatever decision I made, someone's life was about to change forever. The decision followed me home. It followed me into the kitchen while I made coffee. It followed me while I watered my flowers. It followed me when I tried to sleep. And it was waiting for me every morning when I opened my eyes. The house. The trust. Vanessa. Everything now depended on a choice only I could make. For years I had imagined what justice might feel like. I thought it would feel satisfying, triumphant, victorious. Instead, it felt heavy. Because when the people who hurt you are strangers, consequences are easy. When the people who hurt you are your children, everything becomes complicated. 3 days after the meeting at the bank, Howard visited my house. He arrived carrying a small folder. Nothing compared to the mountain of paperwork we'd reviewed earlier. This folder contained only one thing: options. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had paid Vanessa's college tuition bills decades earlier. The same table where Daniel and I used to drink coffee together every Sunday morning. Life has a strange way of bringing us back to the places where important decisions are made. Howard opened the folder. Alexis, I want to be very clear. I nodded. The trust gives you complete authority. No surprises there. We already knew that, but hearing it again mattered, because for most of my life I had given away authority voluntarily. I avoided conflict. I accommodated people. I compromised. I forgave. This time, however, the decision belonged to me. And only me. Howard pointed toward several documents. You could force liquidation. I looked down. A legal path. Perfectly valid. Perfectly enforceable. The mansion could be sold. Debt could be addressed. The trust could protect itself. Vanessa would lose the house. Howard continued. You could also restructure. Another option, more complicated, less severe, a path that created accountability without total destruction. Then he pointed toward a third possibility. You could do nothing. I almost laughed. Doing nothing had been my strategy for years, and look where it had gotten us. When Howard left, I remained at the table for nearly an hour. Thinking, remembering, praying. Not for money, not for revenge, for wisdom. That evening, someone knocked on my front door. I already knew who it was before opening it. Vanessa. She looked different again, not exhausted this time, humbled, a subtle difference, but an important one. She carried no designer handbag, no expensive jewelry, no polished image, just herself. For perhaps the first time in years. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She entered quietly. The house felt smaller than her mansion, yet somehow more peaceful. Vanessa noticed the old photographs on the wall. The same photographs she'd walked past hundreds of times growing up. Pictures of birthdays, school plays, family vacations. Daniel. Us. Memories. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she used to do homework. The same table where she cried after her first heartbreak. The same table where I taught her how to balance a checkbook. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eventually, she broke the silence. I met with Richard. I remained quiet. He wants me to help him fight everything. That didn't surprise me. Will you? She shook her head. No. The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without uncertainty. No? For the first time in a long while, I believed her. Vanessa stared at her hands, then continued. He still thinks money fixes everything. I thought about that, then nodded. Some people spend their entire lives believing that. A sad smile crossed her face. I used to be one of them. The honesty hurt, but it also healed. A little. Not because it erased the past, because it acknowledged it. Healing begins with truth. Always. Vanessa took a deep breath, then looked directly at me. Mom. I waited. I don't expect forgiveness. Another deep breath. I don't expect money. Her voice trembled. I don't expect the house. Tears filled her eyes. I just don't want to lose you. The room became very quiet, painfully quiet. Because unlike every previous conversation, this one wasn't about assets, or signatures, or debt. It was about relationship. The thing that should have mattered all along. I studied my daughter carefully. Years of lies had damaged trust. Deeply. But trust and love are not identical things. Trust can be broken. Love often survives anyway. That's both the beauty and the tragedy of family. I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers, and finally answered. You already lost me once. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks, because she knew exactly what I meant. The distance, the disrespect, the years of pretending, the years of choosing status over relationship. She had lost me long before the party, long before the lies, long before the forged documents. She lowered her head. I'm sorry. This time, I didn't need more words. I believed her. Not completely, not blindly, but enough. Enough to begin, which is all healing ever requires. A beginning. The following week, I made my decision. Not quickly, not emotionally, carefully, deliberately. The way Daniel would have wanted, the way Howard recommended, the way my conscience demanded. I refused to liquidate the property. I refused to destroy Vanessa financially. But I also refused to rescue her from consequences. Instead, a restructuring agreement was created. Debt would be addressed. Responsibilities would remain. Accountability would exist. No free pass. No punishment driven by revenge. Just consequences. Fair consequences. For the first time in years, I wasn't acting out of guilt. I was acting out of wisdom. The difference felt liberating. Several weeks later, Emily visited. We sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Much like Daniel and I had done years before. She smiled. You seem happier. I thought about that, then smiled back. I am. Not because everything was fixed, because it wasn't. Healing is slow. Trust rebuilds slowly. Families recover slowly. But recovery had begun. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt hopeful. Not because my daughter had changed overnight, Because she had finally taken the first genuine step toward changing at all. And sometimes that's where miracles begin. 6 months later, I stood in my backyard watching Emily plant roses. Spring had returned. The air felt warm. The sky was clear. And for the first time in years, peace no longer felt temporary. It felt real. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Emily brushed dirt from her hands and smiled. "What do you think?" I looked at the row of newly planted flowers. "They're beautiful," she grinned. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." We laughed together. Simple moments like that had become precious. Because after everything our family had endured, I finally understood something important. Peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of honesty. And honesty had changed everything. The mansion was gone. Not immediately, not dramatically, but eventually. The restructuring agreement bought time. It created opportunities. It prevented disaster. Yet it couldn't erase reality. Some debts were simply too large. Some lifestyles were simply unsustainable. A few months after our meetings with Howard and Margaret, the property was sold. Not through foreclosure, not through scandal, through an orderly process. A difficult process, but a necessary one. When Vanessa signed the final documents, she cried. Not because of the building, because of what it represented. Years spent chasing appearances. Years spent trying to impress people who didn't truly matter. Years spent measuring success by things instead of relationships. Losing the house hurt, but losing the illusion hurt more. Oddly enough, that became the beginning of her healing. Not the end, the beginning. After the sale, Vanessa moved into a smaller townhouse. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress strangers. Just a home, a real home. At first she hated it. I know because she told me, more than once. Then, something unexpected happened. She started sleeping better. She laughed more. She worried less. The pressure that had controlled her life for years slowly disappeared. And underneath that pressure, a different version of my daughter began to emerge. One I hadn't seen in a very long time. The version Daniel and I raised. Meanwhile, Richard's story followed a very different path. The investigations surrounding his business practices continued. Several financial matters remained unresolved. Lawyers became involved. Consequences arrived. Slowly, predictably. I won't pretend I enjoyed watching it happen. I didn't, but I also didn't interfere. For years, I believed love meant rescuing people from consequences. Now I understood something wiser. Sometimes love means allowing consequences to teach lessons no person can teach. Richard eventually contacted me. Only once. The phone call lasted less than 10 minutes. He apologized. Not perfectly, not eloquently, but sincerely enough. I accepted the apology, then moved forward. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. One can be given freely. The other must be rebuilt. As for Howard Bennett, he retired 3 months later. Before leaving, he invited me to lunch. We spent hours talking about Daniel, about life, about everything that had happened. At one point, Howard smiled and shook his head. "Your husband was remarkable." I laughed. "That's one word for him." Howard grinned. "He saw things years before everyone else." That was certainly true. Then Howard said something I never forgot. "Daniel didn't build that trust to protect money." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Howard leaned back. He built it to protect you. The words hit me unexpectedly hard. Because after everything that happened, I finally understood. The trust had never been about wealth. Not really. It was about dignity, independence, security, protection. Daniel knew money changes people. He knew pressure changes people. He knew fear changes people. Most importantly, he knew I would always choose love before self-protection. So he built safeguards I would never build for myself. Even decades later, those safeguards saved me. The thought still brings tears to my eyes. One evening, shortly before summer, Vanessa visited again. By then, our relationship looked very different. Not perfect, but honest. She arrived carrying a photo album, an old one I'd forgotten existed. We sat together at the kitchen table. Page after page revealed memories. Birthdays, camping trips, Christmas mornings, school graduations, family vacations. Daniel, always Daniel, smiling from nearly every photograph. At one point, Vanessa stopped turning pages. She stared at a picture of herself around age 10, her head resting on my shoulder, both of us laughing, completely unaware of what the future would bring. Tears filled her eyes. I miss her. I looked at the photograph. The little girl. She nodded. I smiled softly. She's still there. More tears appeared. I don't know. I do. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, there was no wall between us, no pride, no status, no performance, just truth. You made mistakes, she nodded. A lot of them. Another nod. But mistakes don't erase who you are. She cried openly then, not from shame, from relief. The relief of no longer pretending. The relief of being seen clearly and loved anyway. That night after she left, I sat alone on the porch. The same porch where Daniel and I once watched sunsets. The same porch where we planned our future. The same porch where he warned me that money changes people. The sky glowed orange and gold. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, and for the first time I felt Daniel's presence not as grief, but as gratitude, because his wisdom had protected me, because his love had outlived him, because his legacy wasn't money. It was family, broken, complicated, imperfect, but healing. My phone buzzed. A text message from Vanessa. Just 6 words. Thank you for not giving up. I stared at the screen for a long time, then smiled. Because that was the real ending to this story. Not the house, not the trust, not the money. A daughter finally understanding what her mother's love had cost. And a mother finally learning that love doesn't require surrendering self-respect. Sometimes the strongest love tells the truth. Sometimes the deepest forgiveness allows consequences. And sometimes the call that changes everything isn't from a banker, a lawyer, or a lender. It's the moment someone finally calls themselves accountable.